Hi, this is Sneha from College Pond, and in this part of the video lecture series, I'm going to talk to you about the Toefl IBT speaking section. We are going to learn step by step the formats of the various speaking tasks. We'll also try and study how to approach these speaking tasks and answer them. Finally, we'll also learn how the evaluation criteria of Toefl works. So be with me throughout. Now let's look at the format of the speaking section overall. The speaking section is designed to measure your ability to speak English effectively in academic settings, which means all the topics will be related to something in your university or in the academic area. There will be 4 tasks that resemble real life situations, and we'll be learning more about that in the next few slides. These 4 tasks will further be divided into 2 subtypes, the first one being the independent speaking task. In the independent speaking task, you will be required to speak for a sustained period of time, like a monologue, for example. And in the integrated speaking task, the format will be slightly different. So you would have to read a passage, and then you probably will have to listen to a talk, like a lecture, or a conversation between 2 students, and then based on the integration of the ideas in these 2 things, you will then be required to give your response. So that's how the format will work overall. Let's get into the details of the independent speaking task now. This task is called independent speaking task because it requires you to respond to a given prompt independently. You're supposed to give like a monologue. And when you're doing that, you are supposed to draw upon your personal opinions and your own ideas and experiences. This task will test you for those skills. How can you express your ideas and your opinions? Can you sufficiently support your reasoning? So you will be usually given 2 choices. The question type is uniform. You will always get the same type of a question. It will never change. Out of these 2 choices, you will just have to pick one and explain your reason for why you prefer that choice, right? In terms of chronology, you have to remember that the independent task will always be the first one in the speaking section. The order of the question types will never change, so you don't have to really worry about that. The format structurally of this question will always remain the same. It will not change. So for example, when the question starts, the speaking prompt will be read out to you. So you will also be able to listen to the prompt, and you will see it as well on your screen in front of you. And once the prompt is up, you will get 15 seconds. There will be a short beep, and then you will have to think about that topic for 15 seconds. After those 15 seconds are up, there will be another beep, and then you get a total time frame of 45 seconds in which you have to record the response and finish your response within 45 seconds. Remember, you cannot afford to get cut off. You have to wind up. So this is a tricky one. Now let's look at an example of question 1. I'm going to play an audio file here, and you will listen to it and try and answer it. After that, we'll look at some sample responses.
Some college students choose to take courses in a variety of subject areas in order to get a broad education. Others choose to focus on a single subject area in order to have a deeper understanding of that area. Which approach to course selection do you think is better for students, and why?
Begin to prepare your response after the beep. Begin speaking after the beep.
Now let's look at a sample response that actually received a score of 4 on the test. After you finish listening to it, I'll explain to you why it received a score of 4.
This is kind of a complicated question. I think it's important to know which stage you are. If you are an undergraduate student, I would rather to take a wide range and wide variety of subjects in different areas because it would expand my knowledge, would improve my understanding for different topics. On the other hand, if I am a graduate student, I would rather to take specific courses because if you know, when you are a graduate student, you are working and dealing with a specific topic, and therefore you have to focus.
Did you listen to that correctly now? What did that student do? What he actually did was, if you observed or listened to it very, very carefully, he broke down his thought process into specific parts. Right at the beginning, he gave his opinion. He said something like, I think it depends on what stage you are. The format requires you to give your opinion. You have to give a choice. What would your choice be? His choice was clear. His choice says, it really depends, right? That's also a stance you can take. So he took that stance and then he explained his opinion with valid reasons, and there was a proper structure to it. Another thing that the test will test, you will be tested on the day of your test is, can you develop the topic properly? He did develop his points very well. So for example, when he said, it depends, if you are an undergrad student, you would want to go into different subjects because you're learning the basics of everything. So he developed his topic by giving a very well explained reason why someone should do that. Then he used a discourse marker like on the other hand to show that now he's going from one thought to another thought. So then he said, on the other hand, if you are a graduate student and if you know the basics of everything by now, you probably want to go deeper into it, and then that is the time when you will go for a single subject. He was developing the thought process very well. And then when he saw that his time is just about to get over, he started winding up the sentence, right? So this is something that you will have to be mindful of on the day of the test as well. You cannot afford to get cut out. You have to finish before your 45 seconds are up. So please keep that in mind. Now let's look at another response. This student got a slightly lower score than what we saw previously. He actually received a score of 3. Please listen to it and then I'll tell you why he received 3.
I think it's better to focus on a single subject area so that I can have a deeper understanding of that area and I can be a professional about that topic or whatever the course I'm taking. And it's for me it's easier to concentrate on one thing, and most people will be easier if they concentrate on one thing. And it depends, but I prefer for studying on the focused a single subject so that.
Did you see what happened there? Now this student did give a complete response, but there were some problems with it. The first one being, he did not develop the topic well. He started with his opinion saying that it's better to choose one single subject, which is fine. He gave his opinion. But after that, he just gave one reason to explain why. And then he said, personally, I prefer to do this. That was kind of a repetition. And then towards the end, there was a lot of dead air. He was not able to elaborate. Probably he should have given say one more reason for why that's a good idea to just take one single subject. The reason why this student got a 3 and not a 4 is because of his lack of development of topic. It was not because he was not fluent, or it was not because he was, he did not understand how to speak in English. That's not the case. Another thing, towards the end, if you see, he kind of trailed off. There was no proper conclusion. There was no proper kind of coming full circle kind of a feeling towards the end. So if that is missing, you will lose big time. So let's wind up our understanding of the independent speaking task with some tips. If you want to score a 4 on your speaking independent section, what you need to do is you need to fulfill all demands of the task. What does that mean? You have to develop the topic well. You should complete it within 45 seconds, not even 1 second extra. And you should have little or no mistakes in terms of completing the task requirements, which means that you should be able to follow all these things that I'm going to talk about now. You should talk in a well-paced and generally clear manner with some minor things here and there with your pronunciation or intonation. It's absolutely fine. They understand that as part of natural speech. But it should not be way off. So for example, if you're talking about something happy, your tone should show that. If you're talking about something sad, your tone should show that. That's very, very important. If there are some minor difficulties in pronunciation, you won't be marked down a lot, I mean. However, you have to use your grammar quite effectively and accurately. If you make grammatical errors, there could be a problem. So for example, if you are making an error and you're correcting yourself quickly without taking a lot of time, that's okay. But if you're making the same type of a grammatical mistake or a tense mistake, for example, again and again and again, so it's clear that you don't understand that, that part of grammar. So that is where you will get marked down. Try and use simple sentences as well as complex sentences. Don't use only simple sentences or only complex sentences. You need to show variety in the way you understand grammar, right? Finally, your response has to be sustained. What it means is that you should not have dead air right in between when you're talking. You should be able to talk continuously for 45 seconds, but it should not look like you are rushing through something. Right? It should be well developed, well paced and complete. It should be a complete response with proper development of the topic. It should be sufficient for the task. If you're given a particular choice between two things, you have to elaborate why you are taking a particular choice and talk sufficiently about it. Don't just give one reason, for example, why you like that preference. Give at least two reasons and then wind it up. If the topic has been well developed and presented coherently, there is a high chance that you will get a 4 score. Also, please make sure that the relationship between ideas is clear. Use discourse markers for this purpose. Like, firstly, another thing that I would like to say is that finally what I mean is, so use all these things to your advantage. I hope this helps. Now let's move on to the next type of question on the test, which is the integrated speaking type of a question. You will see that the integrated speaking task is basically called that because it's quite self-explanatory, isn't it? It's the integrated task. What it means is that you will be integrating your knowledge of listening, speaking, and reading. So you will have to understand that this requires you to use multiple skills. Maybe not at the same time, but one after the other for sure. Please remember that you will have 3 questions in the integrated category. They are question number 2, 3 and 4. And this will always appear in the same order, the question types. So question type 2, question number 2 is a separate type, question number 3 is a separate type, and question number 4 is a separate type. The order will never change, right? The format of each of these questions is slightly different, and we are going to talk about the format in each slide. Whenever we are talking about that particular type of question, we will show you how exactly that question is different. Let's try to understand what the integrated speaking question number 2 is all about. The format will never change as we discussed previously, right? So you will read a passage and you will get around 45 seconds to read this passage. This is very important that you utilize these 45 seconds properly, and you will see why in just a while. After you finish reading this passage, there will be a conversation. And as the name suggests here, this is a campus related situation, which means that the conversation that you will listen to will be something that will always happen on a campus. So maybe between two students, or a conversation maybe between, say, a professor and a student, or something like that. So after you finish listening to that conversation or a lecture maybe, you will listen to the question prompt. And this is very important. Now, when you're listening to the question prompt, you'll always see it flashing in front of you on your screen as well. So you don't have to worry about trying to catch exact words. You just need to understand the flow. And once the prompt is up, you will get 30 seconds to prepare your thought process. And then you will get 60 seconds to record your response. Now, the challenge here is that people feel 30 seconds is too less of a time to prepare, right? But when they actually come to the speaking part, they feel that 60 seconds is too long a time to talk. I cannot talk for such a long time. So that's a challenge, and we are going to address that in the next few slides. Let's now look at how this question appears in the examination. You will see a passage in front of you, and I'm going to give you 45 seconds to read that passage.
I don't like the university's plan.
Really? I've ridden those buses, and sometimes there were only a few people on the bus. It did seem like kind of a waste.
I see your point, but I think the problem is the route's out of date. It only goes through the neighborhoods that have gotten too expensive for students to live in. It's ridiculous that they haven't already changed the route, so it goes where most off-campus students live now. I bet if they did that, they'd get plenty of students riding those buses.
Well, at least they're adding more parking. It's gotten really tough to find a space.
That's the other part I don't like, actually. Cutting back the bus service and adding parking's just going to encourage more students to drive on campus. And that'll just add to the noise around campus and create more traffic. And that'll increase the need for more parking spaces.
Yeah, I guess I can see your point. Maybe it would be better if more students used the buses instead of driving.
Right. And the university should make it easier to do that, not harder.
The man expresses his opinion of the university's plan to eliminate the bus service. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion.
So this is how you will actually see the question on the day of your test. Now what you need to do is you need to utilize your time well. When they gave you 45 seconds, you need to make sure that you are going through the whole paragraph and trying to understand what the main points are. So you can quickly skim through this, because 45 seconds is not a lot. So the university has decided to discontinue its free bus service. So that's the main point. That's the topic sentence. The reason given is that few students ride the buses and buses are expensive to operate. So now you see that there are two reasons that they have given. One is very few people. The other thing is they are expensive. So the university kind of wants to get away with it, get done with it. They also have given in the notice that currently the buses run from the center of the campus past university buildings and through some of the neighborhoods surrounding the campus. The money saved will be used to expand the parking lots. Now this is the university's logic. Once you understand what the university is trying to do, you will understand the context in which the people who are going to have a conversation will talk. So you should understand that there are two things here. One person would probably support the university's choice, and the other person would probably not be supporting the choice. We'll have to see what the conversation is about. But this passage kind of builds the context, right? And then when you move to the conversation, we saw that there were few opinions here. There was a girl and a boy talking. They were students and they were talking about their opinions. The girl said that, when I take the buses, there are very few people, so it's a good thing they're doing. So she's kind of supporting the university's choice, but the boy is kind of giving a counter argument. When you're listening to this, my top strategy for you would be to look at the interchanges, look at where the conversation is flowing, maybe make notes on your sheets, right? Look at what the girl said first, and then what was the boy's opinion. You don't really have to write everything down, just scribble the top phrases which gives you the opinion. And when the boy says, no, there are few people because the routes are out of date, those routes are the bus routes are no longer functional, it's useless, and that's why people are not preferring to take the bus. He's kind of explaining the flaw in the university's logic. So his opinion is actually, he's not supporting the university's decision. So you should be able to quickly understand that this is what the students' opinions are. Then the conversation moves on again to the girl, and this is going to happen again when there is whenever there's a conversation, right? So the girl says, but you know what, they're building more parking lots, so why do you have a problem? And then the conversation moves on to again another flaw. He says, if we have more parking lots, we'll have more people driving in. Now you see where the conversation is going. Finally, the girl has to agree, yeah, probably the university is not right after all. So the boy actually makes her agree to his point of view, right? This is the flow of the whole conversation. Once you understand the whole flow, you will be able to take some time, maybe when you get the time, the 30 seconds to prepare, you will think about what you need to do. The question prompt actually asks you to summarize the opinion or, justify or explain the opinion of one of the speakers. You have to explain the opinion only of that speaker and not the other speaker. Otherwise, you will get marked down, right? So let's move on to some of the sample responses to this question to understand how people have responded.
What the man is saying here is that he wants to keep the bus service for the better being of all the students on campus because there's some students that can't afford a car, therefore they use the free bus service, even though it's not that much. The problem with the bus service right now is that the bus is going through wrong neighborhoods or it's too expensive for students to live. So what they should do is just change the course of the bus, and that will take care of the problem. Also, they should encourage more students to use the bus instead of discourage them. What would be the case if they use the money that they use for the bus service to increase the space of the parking lots for students, which would add to the noise of the campus, and it would be more congested for all the people who are already parking over there.
So now that you see, what did the student do? Did he really give a lot of time to what the other girl student was saying? Not really. Why did he do that, I wonder? He did that because the question prompt clearly said that summarize the man's opinion and not the woman's opinion. That's one thing for you to remember. The other thing for you to remember here is that the structure of his response was very well calculated. He gave a proper structure. He started with the man's opinion right at the beginning, right? And then he gave all the reasons that the man had given in support of his own opinion. He talked about how the buses are expensive for the students, how they are going through the wrong neighborhoods, and all the other reasons basically that the man was talking about. So he summarized it very well. The topic was very well developed. And also, this student, when he was speaking in a very natural, well-paced manner. He did not take a lot of gaps in between. There were not too many fillers, like some of them were there in the beginning, but that does not show his lack of fluency. Those were more of, kind of the gaps that you have when you're thinking about something, right? Those do not show his lack of abilities. So those kind of gaps are okay, right? But if there are too many fillers or too many gaps, then that would show that you are probably not able to recollect the correct word, or you're probably not able to express yourself. So those are the places where you should be a little, you should try to develop your proficiencies in that area. I hope this helped you. Now let's look at another response in the next slide. Now you're going to listen to a woman speaking and giving her response to that particular question. Let's go ahead.
The man thinks that university's decision is wrong. According to his opinion, the bus shouldn't be eliminated. It creates a lot of trouble. And he thinks basically the bus route should be changed. Due to the existing bus route, many students can't avail the bus, and the overcrowded parking lots is an added problem, which is also due to the not riding the university bus. If the student hasn't a car, and if they cannot avail the bus, then few students are bound to drive their car and obviously overcrowded the parking lot. But it's better to make the change of the bus route, and most of the students should use the bus.
Did you see what just happened there? She started off correctly by saying that the man thinks, and then she was planning to give the man's opinion. So far, so good. But then there were certain lapses. First of all, there were certain noticeable grammatical errors, such as overcrowded the parking lot. These are places where she could have been a little more careful. Also, another major requirement of the task is that you have to finish within the time limit that is given to you. And she kind of didn't do that. Another thing that she was not very careful about is the coherence of her response. She started with the bus route being outdated, which is a correct response. Then she talked about the overcrowded parking. She could not develop the part correctly where she had to talk about how the lack of buses would lead students to basically drive more cars, drive more often. So she did not develop that part quite well. She just mentioned that and left it, but that was a major point which she could have elaborated. Another thing that happened was, after she said all this, she then came back to, but it is better to change the bus route. So again, there was a lack of coherence here. So you have to understand, and you have to learn from these mistakes and make sure that your response is well structured. Although this response has a lot of mistakes, she did complete the response. She did give at least 2 or 3 points, which is why she got a 3 score. If she hadn't given more points, she would have received an even lower score. Right? She could have, taken care of the coherence, and the score could have been something else. I hope this feedback helps you. Moving on, let's talk about the next question type, which is the integrated speaking question number 3. If you look at the format, it's a little similar to other integrated tasks. You will be integrating your skills. So you will be reading a passage for 45 seconds. The difference here is that the listening audio that you will get will be a professor's lecture. It will probably not be a conversation. So that's one thing that you'll have to keep in mind. Once the lecture is over, after a long monologue, that is, you will get a question prompt. The question prompt will give you your instructions about what you need to do. And after you get your question prompt, after that's over, you will get 30 seconds to prepare your responses in your mind or on your notepad. And then you get 60 seconds to say your response, and this gets recorded. So I hope you've understood the format correctly. Let's now look at an example of a question 3 type of a task. There is an example of a passage in front of you. I want you to take 45 seconds and read that quickly. I'll wait for you. Now let's listen to this part of a lecture, and once you finish listening to that, I'll explain to you what is the relevance of that. Make sure you take notes and follow the flow of ideas in this lecture. Happy listening.
Now listen to part of a talk in a sociology class. The professor is discussing audience effects.
Okay, so we said that the way we interact with others has an impact on our behavior. In fact, there's some interesting research to suggest that in one type of interaction, when we're being observed, specifically when we know we're being watched as we perform some activity, we tend to increase the speed at which we perform that activity. In one study, college students were asked to each put on a pair of shoes with laces they would have to tie. Now, one group of students was told that they would be observed. The second group, however, didn't know they were being observed. The students who were aware that they were being watched actually tied their shoes much faster than the students who thought they were alone. Other studies confirm the same is true even when we're learning new activities. Let's say someone is learning a new task, for example, learning how to type. When they're conscious of being observed, they'll likely begin typing at a much faster rate than they would if they were alone. But, and this is interesting, the study also showed that certain common behavior, things people typically do, like making mistakes when you're learning something new, that behavior pattern will also increase. So in other words, when we're learning to type and we know we're being watched, we'll type faster, but we'll also make more mistakes.
Explain how the examples of tying shoes and learning to type demonstrate the principle of audience effects.
So what did you learn from the question prompt? The question prompt very specifically says, explain how the examples of tying shoes and learning to type demonstrates the principle of audience effects. If you listened very carefully to the long lecture, which is like a big monologue, you observed that there were two parts to it. He initially talked about how interaction affects behavior, and the example for that was your example where he talked about students tying their shoelaces. If they were being observed, they tied it faster, that example. And then the next part in the lecture talks about what happens to people when they're learning new activities, for example. So here he gave the example of people learning to type and how their speed increases, but so do their mistakes. Immediately after you hear about some typing example, they go back in the question to the example where they were talking about tying shoes. Now this creates kind of confusion in your mind if you understand the psychology, right? So which is why taking ample notes is really important when you are listening. If you were taking notes and structuring the audience, the lecturer's thoughts and the lecturer's progression of ideas, you would notice the structure. You would notice that he's talking about two things in the lecture, and you would also notice that he has given two examples specifically. So when you come to the question prompt, you will not feel lost. I hope this tip helps. So let's now look at a sample response. Let's try and understand how this student got a score of 4 on this test.
In this lecture, the professor gives two examples to illustrate the principle of audience effects. One of them is tying the shoes and the other one learning to type. So in the experiment where two groups of students were asked to tie their shoes, the first group was said that they would be observed, and the other one was not told so. And the first group that knew it would be observed tied their shoes faster, and the other one slower. In the second example, learning new activities such as typing, again, when people are conscious of being observed, they type faster. However, they tend to make more mistakes as well. So the suggestion is to practice new activities alone in order to reduce mistakes. So these two...
This student gave a very well structured response. She actually started her talk with the professor gives two examples. One of them is dash and the other one is dash. I hope you can see the structure here. That helps us to understand that she has organized her thoughts very well before even she started speaking. Another thing that she did is she explained and elaborated on that example. The question prompt actually asks you to talk about how these two examples explain the professor's point of view. And she demonstrated her understanding. She not only demonstrated her understanding of these examples, but she also nicely tied it down to how it explains the professor's point of view as well towards the end, if you see. And very importantly, she finished well in time. Her her pace of talking was natural. It sounded soothing. There was no rushing around for anything to finish. So that's why she got a score 4. Now let's look at another response. This one got a score of 3. And I hope by now you are kind of trying to understand what is the difference between a score 4 and a score 3 response. And this response will exactly tell you that. I'll discuss this after you listen to it. Please go ahead and listen.
Well, tying shoes or learning new activities such as typing, trying to learn type and how to type on the computer, the audience definitely have effects on you. For example, if you know that somebody is watching you, then you type faster, or you will tie your shoes faster, but at the same time you'll make more mistakes. However, if you're not aware that somebody is watching you, looking at you, then you may learn slowlier, but therefore you can type slowlier, but on the other hand, you can decrease the number of errors on your typing. So the research suggests that you should do it by.
I hope you heard that carefully. What happened here was that we could hear in the students' response a lot of fillers. There were a lot of ahs, you can, you should. So there was a lot of hesitation, especially towards the end. If you listen to that carefully, you would see a lot of dead air towards the end especially. Also, when it comes to the structure of the response, the structure was not very well conceived, right? The student was talking, but he did not in a way start with the professor's point. He did not start with something like these were the professor's 2 points, point number 1, point number 2. So it was not very well visible to us, the structure. Another thing that he did, which was a major mistake, was he kind of combined the points where he was talking about the tying of the shoelaces and learning new activities in the same flow. He did not kind of, very well bifurcate or divide these two examples very well. He just went on talking, rambling in a way, right? So that is also not the correct way. He could have received a score 4 because he did cover all the points, but where he lost the race was in developing the topics properly and coherently. So while he said everything, he didn't say it the right way. Now finally, let's come to the last question type of this section, which is the question number 4. It is an integrated task which is basically related to an academic setting, which is the lecture, the most common academic setting, right? So in this question, what will happen is you will first listen to a lecture, listen very carefully, and then there will be a question prompt. So in this question, you really don't have a passage or anything to read from. You will just listen to a lecture and then directly the question prompt will appear. You have to listen carefully to this particular question prompt because it will give you certain instructions which you will have to follow. And once the prompt is over, then the timer will start for 20 seconds, which is your preparation time. Note that in this type of question, you have less time for preparation and more talk time. Now let's listen to a lecture and then go back to approaching this task.
So, let's talk about money. What is money? Well, typically people think of coins and paper bills as money, but that's using a somewhat narrow definition of the term. A broad definition is this: money is anything that people can use to make purchases with. Since many things can be used to make purchases, money can have many different forms. Certainly, coins and bills are one form of money. People exchange goods and services for coins or paper bills, and they use this money, these bills, to obtain other goods and services. For example, you might give a taxi driver $5 to purchase a ride in his taxi, and he in turn gives the $5 to a farmer to buy some vegetables. But as I said, coins and bills aren't the only form of money under this broad definition. Some societies make use of a barter system. Basically, in a barter system, people exchange goods and services directly for other goods and services. The taxi driver, for example, might give a ride to a farmer in exchange for some vegetables. Since the vegetables are used to pay for a service, by our broad definition, the vegetables are used in barter as a form of money. Now, as I mentioned, there's also a second, a narrower definition of money. In the United States, only coins and bills are legal tender, meaning that by law, a seller must accept them as payment. The taxi driver must accept coins or bills as payment for a taxi ride, okay? But in the U.S., the taxi driver is not required to accept vegetables in exchange for a ride. So a narrower definition of money might be whatever is legal tender in a society, whatever has to be accepted as payment.
So I hope you were able to listen very clearly and actively to that lecture. What was that question all about? Did it ask you to kind of summarize the lecturer's opinion or anything like that? No, it didn't, right? Which is why 20 seconds are actually enough. You don't really have to summarize everything that the lecturer was talking about. What you need to instead do is you just need to prepare your thoughts about what were the two definitions and then just talk about it. Now, if you were actively listening and taking notes while you were listening, it's quite easy to do. So, for example, when I was listening to this talk, I made my notes and I kind of observed that there were two definitions of money. There was a narrower definition and then there was a much broader definition. The narrower definition definitely talked about the legal tender or the coins and bills and what is acceptable as money currently. But the broader definition is what she talked about, is when she talked about the barter system. So she very clearly talked about these two things, right? So in your response, you don't have to summarize anything. You just have to talk about what were the two definitions. So you need to mention the first definition, elaborate on that, then mention the second definition and elaborate on that. That's it. You're not required to do anything more than that. So which is why the 20 seconds time frame that you receive is quite enough for you. The challenge here is to speak in a sustained manner for 60 seconds or a minute. And if you've not organized your thoughts or if you have not made notes while you were listening, that will be difficult. A top expert tip here would be to kind of start drawing. A lot of times you will see that these lectures are well structured, which means while you're listening, you can draw a tree diagram to organize the thoughts. You can draw like pictures or label things. You can do all those kind of things to organize your thoughts while you're listening, because after you finish listening, you're not going to get much time, right? So I hope this tip helps you. Let's move forward and look at some of the sample responses to understand this task a little bit better. Now in this file, we are going to listen to a student's response. She's actually received a score of 4, and we are going to try and figure out why did she receive such a high score. Please listen to this.
The professor said that money is a medium of exchange. So anything that you can purchase something with is considered to be money. That's one definition. That means when she uses the example of a taxi driver who accepts money for his ride. But if he drives a fruit selling person, he can also, instead of money, accept fruit for his drive. For the drives he gives the fruit person. So in that case, the fruit is the medium of exchange and not the money. So under the first definition, not only dollar bills and coins are money, but also other mediums of exchange, like fruit, in this case for the taxi driver. On the second definition, she says it's a legal definition. For legal definition, just coins and dollar bills are legal money in this definition.
So if you listened carefully to that, you will see that there was a kind of a good pace in her response. She was timing it well. What she also did is that right at the beginning she said the professor said that, and she began right with the professor's definitions, 2 definitions. She explained the first one and then she said that's one definition. So she kind of showed that she understands what the question requires. The question requires her to explain the 2 different definitions, and right at the beginning of her talk she made it clear that she understands the question by saying that that's one definition, right? Then she moves on to explain that definition very well. So she scored well on the topic development part. She did not just mention that definition and leave it at there. If you do that, then you will never go more than score 3, right? So she did explain that definition very well, and only then she moved on to the next definition of money, which is the legal definition. And then she went on to explain that as well. She completed the topic well within time, so that was the best part. If you noticed very, very carefully, she did not have a lot of fillers. She did not have too many grammatical errors. There was slight hesitation towards the end where she was trying to recollect what was the word that the professor had used. The professor had used the word legal tender, and she kind of repeated the word legal, trying to remember the word tender. But she recovered very quickly from that and she said legal money, which is kind of synonymous. It's okay. If you also noticed, she said fruit. She kept saying fruit, the farmer and the fruit, whereas in the original example it was the farmer and the vegetable. But still she didn't get marked down because the meaning of the definition did not change. The question requires you to explain the definition. So some minor mistakes here and there in terms of the context are fine. But as far as her explanation of the definition goes, that was on point. So that's why she received a score 4 for her response. Well, that was good enough, right? But a lot of students are confused between score 3 and score 4 responses. They're sometimes not able to understand what's the difference. So let's again take a look at a score 3 response for the same question so that we figure out what was the difference between these 2 responses. Let's listen.
One of the definition of money presented by the professor is money is that anything can exchange with the purchase. For example, including the money, the coin, beer, and the food vegetable like this, we can exchange with something to buy by purchase. So first definition is just anything can exchange with purchase. The another definition of money presented by the professor is whatever legal accepting the whatever. For example.
What do you think about that response? Why do you think she could not go beyond the score 3? She did talk about the definitions of money, right? So she understood the topic. It was not like she did not get the topic. She understood that she has to talk about the 2 definitions that the professor had put forth. So she started her talk by saying what the professor said, right? She talked about the professor's broader definition of money, which relates to things that can purchase, money that can help you, purchase anything. But if you noticed, at that point, she was kind of stuck on the word anything, and she repeated that again and again, trying to look for the correct word, that could follow that word. Another problem in that response was that there were a lot of fillers and gaps. There was a lot of hesitation. When it comes to developing the topic, she mentioned the definitions and she explained that a little, but she could not really bring herself to develop that further or elaborate on any of these definitions. Finally, towards the end, she was also stuck with the second definition and could not take forward the conversation to a complete full circle or a close. So this is why the score could never go beyond the 3 score. Although she understood the task and she attempted it and she could, give the 2 definitions in a slightly short manner, where she lost was the coherence and the topic development part. So these are things that you will have to be careful and you'll have to work on them if these are your problem areas. Finally, let's talk about the evaluating criteria for this task. If you look at the screen, you will understand exactly what I mean by that. A score 4 response fulfills all the demands of the task with less or no mistakes in terms of completing the task requirements. Now, what are the task requirements actually? When you hear a prompt and it says, summarize the man's opinions. So in that case, you have to understand that the task requires you to summarize his opinion and not the other speaker's opinion. Similarly, in the last question, when you look at some, talking about some points and details from a lecture, you have to exactly pick up those keywords from the question prompt and talk about them. If the question is asking you to do A and you are doing B, that's the wrong thing. That means that you've not understood the task requirements. So, which means that you have to basically get very good at reading the keywords or understanding the keywords from the question prompts. And doing that along with listening and reading and combining all these skills is something that you need to master. Another thing that you need to be careful about is your speech. You should look natural and you should not be someone who talks in a very you need not be someone who uses a very forceful voice or anything like that. It has to be very soothing to the ear. Whoever's listening to it should feel happy about it. It should be well paced. Although you could have some minor pauses here and there. You could speak faster at some places and slower at some others, depending on what you're talking about. That's okay, that's natural speech. But there should not be major and constant inconsistencies. So for example, you cannot be talking in a monotone. You cannot be talking like the speaker uses grammar effectively. No, that's not how you talk about it. What will happen is you will get very less points on your intonation aspects of your marking. So make sure that your pace, your pronunciation is standard, your pace is well tuned. So keep all these things in mind. The speaker should use grammar effectively to get a score 4. When I say that, what do I mean? You should be able to, use correct structures. So for example, if you are trying to explain something complex and you are going to club two ideas together, use conjunctions like and. If you are going to express two contrasting ideas, use markers or signal words like but or although, on the other hand, on the contrary, right? These things show that you understand grammar very well, you understand discourse very well, you understand conversation very well, right? Another thing is your word choice. Your word choice is very important. Now, a lot of students ask us, should I be using very high level words, right? Should I be using level 5 words or something like that? So, not really necessary. This is not a test where you have to impress. This is a test where you have to express, right? So, it doesn't matter if you don't know high level words or if you don't really understand certain words. That's okay. Speak naturally, use simple words. It's better to use simple words rather than using very high level language, sophisticated high level words and using them in the wrong context. So that would in fact fetch you less marks. So avoid doing that. There is no hard and fast rule or there is no shortcut to this. You just need to talk naturally. As long as you're conveying the meaning properly, it's absolutely fine. Another thing, and in fact this is very important, is your clear progression of ideas. So when you're talking about ideas, when you're conveying some information, when you're talking about point A, B, C, make sure that there is a clear link between all these points. You cannot have point A as a disjuncted point and then point C and then again you come back to point A and then go to point B. That is not something you should do. You should completely avoid that. That shows that you're not organized in your mind, right? And that's not going to help you. Another thing that you need to keep in mind is you should convey all the relevant information that is required by the task. So you have to do everything that the task is asking you to do in the prompt. If the task has asked you to do X, Y and Z, and if you do only X and Y, then that's going to be a major problem. You're not really fulfilling all the requirements of the task. However, do not get nervous because sometimes you might have minor mistakes, right? It's natural to have that. So for example, you could make mistakes in pronunciating a particular word in a particular way. If you do that once, that's fine. If you do it consistently throughout, that's not a minor error anymore. So that shows that you don't really know the pronunciation of that word. But if you make small mistakes, do not let that kind of bog you down. When you're speaking, if you realize that you have made a mistake, quickly switch over and recover from that. Do not dwell on that. That's the most important thing. Finally, some tips for you. Speak at a natural pace. Do not rush, right? What you need to do is you need to always record and time yourself when you're practicing. A lot of students do this. They speak to themselves in front of the mirror so that they can get comfortable with their own gestures, or they can emote, they can use the right intonation. So do that if that helps you while you practice. But whatever you do, always have a recorder on you could do this on your phone maybe. You could record your voice, see how your intonation is, see whether you can finish your thoughts within 45 or 60 seconds, whatever the task requires you to do. Another benefit of getting yourself recorded is that you can also get feedback, right? You can get feedback from friends or experts. You can ask them to give you guidelines on what else you could do to make yourself better, right? Again, high level vocabulary is not really required, so don't really focus too much and stress out about that. Just focus on completing all the requirements of the task and you should be good to go. I hope this particular part has been particularly helpful for you all, and you all will get good scores in the examination. I'm really hopeful for that. Thank you so much.